Welcome to Triune Biblical University Global Extension, USA. We are excited to have you join us today as we embark on an enriching journey through history, learning, and culture. Whether you're a current viewer, subscriber, or someone who is about to become part of our growing community, we warmly welcome you. At Triune Biblical University Global Extension USA, we are committed to providing a diverse and insightful range of educational content, and today's video, titled History of Architecture in New York, is a perfect example of our dedication to exploring topics that connect faith, culture, and education. New York's architectural landscape is a testament to human creativity, resilience, and vision, and we're thrilled to delve into its fascinating history with you. Thank you for being part of our journey, and we hope this video sparks your curiosity and appreciation for the beauty and innovation that defines one of the world's most iconic cities. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy as we dive into the history of architecture in New York. Let's get started. Introduction. The birth of New York's architectural identity. New York City's architecture is a story of transformation, shaped by waves of migration, economic development, and cultural evolution. The city's skyline, neighborhoods, and iconic structures are not just physical entities but representations of the history, aspirations, and identity of its people. In this section, we trace the birth of New York's architectural identity, beginning with its earliest settlements and examining the foundations laid by its colonial past. 1. The birth of New York's architectural identity. New York's architectural story begins in the early colonial period, when the area was first inhabited by indigenous peoples and later settled by Europeans. This section explores how the city's architecture evolved from humble beginnings to become a reflection of both European colonial influences and the unique cultural blend that characterized New York's identity. The architectural style that emerged in the early days was a fusion of practical, utilitarian designs shaped by European traditions, native influences, and the region's geographical and economic conditions. This was the foundation for what would eventually become the diverse, vibrant architectural landscape that defines the city today. Early settlements and colonial foundations. The story of New York's architectural identity begins in the early 1600s when the Dutch first arrived in the region. They established the colony of New Amsterdam, which would later become New York after the British took control in 1664. Early Dutch settlements featured simple, functional buildings made from local materials, such as wood and brick, influenced by the Dutch's pragmatic approach to design. These early settlers built homes, barns, and marketplaces with slanted roofs, steep gables, and small windows, designed to withstand the region's harsh winters. The colonial foundation was built on necessity. The structures were often modest, with minimal ornamentation, reflecting the pragmatic mindset of the settlers. However, the Dutch also brought their traditions of urban planning and organization, which influenced the layout of the city. Streets were laid out in a grid pattern, and houses were organized around a central square, a precursor to the urban planning principles that would shape the city in later centuries. The Dutch influence on architecture. The Dutch left an indelible mark on New York's early architecture, blending their European heritage with the realities of life in the New World. Dutch-inspired townhouses, gabled roofs, and stone buildings are visible in the early buildings of New York. These structures had simple, geometric forms, with brick facades and a focus on utility rather than ornamentation. The Dutch colonial style also introduced some architectural elements that would go on to become staples of New York's architectural identity. The most significant feature was the Dutch gable, a triangular roof structure with decorative details, which influenced the design of many early buildings, including townhouses and churches. The Dutch influence can still be seen today in the historic districts of Lower Manhattan, especially in the Stone Street area, where some of the oldest buildings in the city can be found. In addition to residential buildings, the Dutch established important civic buildings, including warehouses, public houses, and churches. These early public buildings were practical and designed for functionality rather than grandeur, though many featured ornate facades as a nod to the wealth and status of the colony's commercial elite. The transition to British rule. In 1664, New Amsterdam fell to the British, who renamed it New York in honor of the Duke of York. This transition brought a new wave of architectural influences, particularly the Georgian and Colonial revival styles from Britain. As the British took control, they introduced new architectural styles that would dominate the landscape for the next century. Under British rule, New York began to grow into a major urban center, and with this growth came a demand for more formal, planned architectural designs. The British influence shifted the focus from simple, utilitarian buildings to structures that emphasized symmetry, proportion, and elegance. New architectural styles, such as Georgian and Federal, became increasingly popular, characterized by their emphasis on balanced facades, brick construction, and classical columns. This period also saw the construction of significant public buildings, such as churches and government buildings, which set the stage for the grander, more elaborate structures that would emerge in the 19th and 20th centuries. The British influence provided the foundation for the city's eventual emergence as a cultural and economic powerhouse, laying the groundwork for the grandeur and opulence of New York's later architectural periods. Chapter 1. The Rise of Urbanism. 1700s, early 1800s. The 18th century was a time of rapid growth and transformation for New York City. As the city emerged from its colonial roots and became an important center of commerce and governance, its architectural landscape began to evolve in response to both the demands of urbanization and the changing political environment. The development of infrastructure, new building styles, and the rise of urbanism marked a significant shift, as the city began to take on the form of a modern urban center. This chapter will explore the early colonial buildings and designs, the influence of Georgian and Federal styles, the impact of the American Revolution on architecture, and the construction of the city's first public buildings. 1. Early colonial buildings and designs. By the early 18th century, New York was transitioning from a small colonial settlement to a bustling port city. The first buildings in the city were modest structures, mostly made from timber, brick, and stone, as resources allowed. Early colonial buildings were simple, practical, and designed to serve functional purposes rather than aesthetic ones. The vernacular architecture of the time reflected the city's reliance on local materials and the adaptation to New York's weather and environment. The Dutch colonial influence remained in some of these early buildings, especially in neighborhoods like Lower Manhattan. These houses were often built with steep, gabled roofs, dormer windows, and brick or timber construction, which provided insulation against both winter cold and summer heat. Early Dutch-influenced homes were often long, narrow, and designed around a central hearth. These buildings were practical, with little ornamentation, and featured a straightforward rectangular layout. In the early 1700s, stone buildings began to emerge, and brick became a favored material due to its durability and resistance to fire. Many of these buildings were row houses, connected in a continuous line along the streets, which contributed to the growing urban character of the city. The front doorways of many homes were adorned with simple decorations, including pediments and columns, which hinted at the influence of European classical styles beginning to emerge in New York. The expansion of the city also required the development of more significant structures for trade and commerce. Wharves, warehouses, and merchants' houses became more prominent along the waterfront. These buildings, often large and functional, were typically built of brick or wood and designed to serve the growing commercial needs of the port city. 2. Georgian and Federal styles in New York. By the mid-18th century, New York began to embrace the Georgian style, which was prevalent in British colonial architecture. This style was defined by symmetry, clean lines, brick facades, and the use of classical elements like pilasters, columns, and decorative moldings. The shift towards Georgian architecture in New York was influenced by the city's growing importance as a port and commercial hub. Georgian buildings were typically 2 or 3 stories, with a central front door framed by decorative columns or pediments. The use of brick was widespread, especially in the construction of houses and townhouses, which became a popular architectural form in the city. The symmetry of Georgian architecture reflected the Enlightenment ideals of order, rationality, and balance that were prevalent in Britain and its colonies. As the century progressed, the Federal style emerged as a more refined, updated version of Georgian architecture, influenced by the ideals of the young American Republic. Federal architecture favored lighter, more decorative elements compared to Georgian, with cleaner lines and an emphasis on elegance and simplicity. It also incorporated a growing interest in the classical architecture of ancient Greece and Rome, which was seen as a reflection of the new nation's values. In New York, Federal-style townhouses became especially prominent in the late 18th century. These buildings were characterized by their symmetry, with regular window placement and proportions that balanced the facades. The use of elegant doorways with fanlights and decorative ironwork became common. Brownstones, which later became a defining feature of New York's architecture, were first popularized during this time and became a preferred material for residential buildings. Federal-style buildings were not limited to residential homes. Public buildings, such as courthouses and churches, also embraced the style, with classical columns and domed roofs reflecting the grandeur and ideals of the new nation. The Federal style laid the groundwork for the architectural identity of a post-revolutionary New York, highlighting the city's desire to project its new civic and cultural identity. 3. The impact of the American Revolution on architecture. The American Revolution, 1775 to 1783, had a profound impact on the political, social, and architectural landscape of New York City. As the city was a major battleground during the Revolution, much of its physical and cultural landscape was altered. The changes brought about by the Revolution would influence both the construction of new buildings and the demolition or repurposing of older structures. In the wake of the Revolution, New York's architecture began to reflect the ideals of the new republic, emphasizing civic responsibility, public life, and national pride. The Revolution had a significant influence on public architecture. New public buildings, such as government offices and courthouses, were designed to reflect the values of the new American government. The need for such structures grew as the city became the temporary capital of the United States, 1785 to 1790. Federal architecture continued to evolve, reflecting the country's aspirations for a democratic and orderly future. These buildings were designed to project stability, equality, and republicanism through classical forms and proportions. As New York City's role as the nation's capital led to the construction of new public spaces, the idea of civic architecture became central to the city's development. City Hall, completed in 1812, became a key symbol of the new nation's government. Designed in the Federal style, City Hall was both a practical space for local governance and a symbol of the Republic's ideals. On a more personal level, the Revolution also sparked a shift in architectural taste, particularly in the use of classical ornamentation. Revolutionary thinkers were inspired by ancient Greek and Roman architecture, which came to symbolize democracy, public virtue, and the foundations of Western civilization. This shift in taste led to the adoption of neoclassical styles in both civic and private buildings, creating a more monumental and ceremonial atmosphere in New York's architectural landscape. 4. The construction of New York's first public buildings. By the end of the 18th century, the growing population and political importance of New York necessitated the construction of public buildings that would serve not only practical functions but also symbolize the authority of the new republic. The first public buildings in New York included City Hall, the post office, public markets, and churches, each serving to establish the city's cultural and political identity. One of the most notable of these early public buildings was New York's City Hall, designed by architect Joseph Franz in the Federal style. Completed in 1812, City Hall became the seat of the city's municipal government and a defining architectural symbol of New York's civic identity. The building's classical design, with its columns, pediments, and grand proportions, was meant to convey the idea of a stable, enduring government. The construction of public markets and post offices also reflected the city's growing need for services to accommodate its expanding population. New York's early public markets, such as Washington Market, established in 1793, were often housed in simple, utilitarian buildings but were vital to the functioning of the city's economy. The expansion of public infrastructure would continue throughout the 19th century, culminating in the development of monumental structures like Grand Central Terminal and Penn Station. Churches were another key aspect of New York's public life in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. The city's growing population of immigrants, especially from Europe, created a demand for houses of worship. Buildings like Trinity Church, reconstructed in 1790, and St. Paul's Chapel, completed in 1766, became central to New Yorkers' daily lives, serving as both spiritual and civic centers. As New York's government and economy expanded, the construction of public buildings and infrastructure became essential to the functioning of the city. These early structures laid the foundation for the architectural landscape that would define the city in the centuries to come. The 18th century saw the rise of urbanism in New York City, as it transformed from a colonial outpost into an emerging urban center. Early buildings reflected the needs of a growing, bustling city, with styles like Georgian and Federal architecture emphasizing order, elegance, and symmetry. The American Revolution's impact on architecture marked a shift in public and private design, emphasizing ideals of democracy and civic virtue through neoclassical forms. The construction of New York's first public buildings, including City Hall and early churches, cemented the city's new identity as a center of commerce, government, and public life. As the city moved toward the 19th century, these architectural trends would continue to evolve, providing the foundation for the modern metropolis that New York would become. Chapter 2: The Age of Innovation and Industrialization. Mid-1800s, late 1800s. The second half of the 19th century in New York City was marked by rapid growth, innovation, and industrialization. This period witnessed groundbreaking advancements in technology, urbanization, and architecture. As the city became a global hub for commerce, finance, and culture, its architectural landscape transformed in response to new needs and ambitions. The mid-1800s to late 1800s saw the birth of the skyscraper, the rise of iconic housing types like the brownstone and row house, the influences of European design movements like Beaux Arts, and the development of crucial public infrastructure that helped the city grow. Alongside these innovations, the Gilded Age ushered in an era of extreme wealth, luxury, and opulence, which left an indelible mark on the city's architectural identity. 1. The birth of skyscrapers. The mid-19th century in New York marked the dawn of skyscrapers, a revolutionary shift in architectural design and urban development. While taller buildings had existed for centuries, it was the invention of the steel frame and elevator technology that allowed for the rapid construction of multi-story buildings, fundamentally changing the city's skyline. The first steel-framed skyscraper in New York is often credited as the Home Insurance Building in Chicago, 1885, but it was in New York that skyscrapers truly flourished. In the 1880s and 1890s, architects like William LeBaron Jenney, Louis Sullivan, and D.H. Burnham began experimenting with steel frames, which enabled buildings to reach unprecedented heights without compromising structural integrity. By the late 19th century, New York City had become the epicenter of skyscraper construction. Early examples of skyscrapers include the Woolworth Building, completed in 1913, which stood as the tallest building in the world for a time. This was followed by the Flatiron Building, 1902, which became a symbol of the new age of skyscrapers. The elevator allowed buildings to rise higher, and innovations like steel frame construction and reinforced concrete made it possible to create taller, more efficient buildings. The invention of these high-rise structures created a new type of urban space, addressing the city's growing demand for office and residential spaces. Skyscrapers became a symbol of the modern industrial economy, and as they reached ever greater heights, they also represented New York's ambition and vision for the future. They redefined the relationship between architecture and urban space, as the need for horizontal expansion gave way to vertical growth, transforming the city's skyline. 2. The rise of the brownstone and row house. As New York's population exploded in the 19th century, there was an increasing demand for housing that could accommodate the growing number of middle-class families and immigrants. The solution to this housing crisis came in the form of the brownstone and row houses, which became iconic representations of New York City's urban landscape during the 1800s. The brownstone, a distinctive, reddish-brown sandstone often used in New York's residential construction, was first popularized in the mid-19th century. These buildings were typically 3 to 4 stories high, with elegant facades and steps leading up to the front door. The use of brownstone in residential buildings became so widespread that it became synonymous with New York's middle and upper-class neighborhoods, particularly in areas like Brooklyn, Harlem, and the Upper West Side of Manhattan. The popularity of brownstone facades reflected both the aesthetic preferences of the time and the availability of affordable building materials. In the same period, the row house became a common form of urban housing, particularly in neighborhoods that were rapidly urbanizing. These houses were attached or semi-detached and shared sidewalls with neighboring structures, which allowed for efficient use of land in the city's dense urban environment. Row houses were particularly popular in areas like Greenwich Village and the Upper East Side and were typically built in the Italianate, Gothic Revival, or Second Empire styles. Both the brownstone and row house styles emphasized symmetry, decorative elements, and functional space, with each unit designed to provide private family residences with a touch of elegance. These forms of housing became crucial to shaping New York's iconic residential neighborhoods and were seen as a symbol of urban success for the burgeoning middle and upper classes. 3. Influences of the Beaux Arts movement. The Beaux Arts architectural style, which emerged from the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris in the mid-19th century, profoundly influenced New York City's architecture during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Known for its grandeur, symmetry, and decorative elements, the Beaux Arts style reflected the opulence of the Gilded Age and the city's aspirations to be a global center of culture and commerce. Beaux Arts architecture was characterized by elaborate facades, ornate detailing, and the use of classical elements, such as columns, arches, and pediments. Buildings designed in this style often had monumental entrances, grand staircases, and rich decorative moldings, creating a sense of scale and formality that expressed the wealth and power of the city. The influence of Beaux Arts is most clearly seen in the construction of public buildings and civic institutions in New York. Notable examples include the New York Public Library, 1911, and Grand Central Terminal, 1913. Both of these buildings represent the pinnacle of Beaux Arts design, featuring large, open spaces and monumental scale. Grand Central Terminal, in particular, remains one of New York's most recognizable and beloved buildings, with its soaring ceilings, intricate carvings, and iconic clock. The Beaux Arts style was also seen in mansions and private residences, especially in neighborhoods like Upper Fifth Avenue and Park Avenue. These homes were designed to reflect the wealth and status of their owners, often employing luxurious materials and elaborate decorations to communicate affluence. In addition to the physical design, Beaux Arts architecture emphasized careful planning of urban spaces. Buildings were often arranged in a way that emphasized their visual impact on the surrounding environment, helping to shape the city's urban planning during a period of massive growth. 4. Public infrastructure and railroads. The Industrial Revolution of the late 19th century brought with it unprecedented urban growth, necessitating the creation of new public infrastructure to support a rapidly expanding population. Railroads, in particular, played a pivotal role in shaping the city's physical landscape and infrastructure. Railroad stations became monumental landmarks in New York City, serving as gateways for travelers arriving from across the United States and abroad. Penn Station, completed in 1910, in its original Beaux Arts form, was one of the most significant transportation hubs in the world, connecting New York to the rest of the country. The construction of this large-scale, monumental station reflected both the growing demands of the city's population and the economic importance of New York as a national center of commerce. In addition to railroads, subways and elevated train systems were developed in the late 19th century to accommodate the city's growing needs. The development of New York's subway system, initiated in the early 1900s, allowed people to live further away from their workplaces and helped spread the urban population across the city. The construction of bridges like the Brooklyn Bridge, completed in 1883, also dramatically changed the city's transportation infrastructure, making it easier to cross the East River and linking Manhattan with Brooklyn. These engineering feats contributed to the expansion of New York's urban sprawl and transformed how people interacted with the city. The creation of these public infrastructure projects not only supported the city's rapid growth but also played a key role in shaping its architectural development. The monumental scale of these public works reflected the ambition and technological advances of the era. 5. Landmarks of the Gilded Age. Wealth and opulence in architecture. The Gilded Age, 1870s–1900, was a time of incredible wealth and social disparity in New York. The city's most affluent families, often referred to as the robber barons, constructed lavish homes and mansions that were designed to impress and showcase their wealth. These homes were typically built in the Beaux Arts or Second Empire styles, with ornate facades, expansive interiors, and elaborate gardens. The most famous district for these lavish homes was Fifth Avenue, which became a symbol of New York's social elite. Mansion complexes like the Carnegie Mansion, 1901, and Astor Mansion, demolished, were built to rival the grand estates of European aristocracy, combining luxury and technological advancements of the time. These homes were designed with expansive floor plans, high ceilings, and elaborate interior decorations to display the wealth and refinement of their owners. These buildings, however, were not just private residences. They were cultural symbols of the American dream, representing a new class of wealthy industrialists who amassed their fortunes through railroads, oil, and steel. The construction of these opulent homes marked a shift in New York's architectural landscape, as buildings that once served functional purposes now became monuments to wealth, status, and social competition. The grandeur of the Gilded Age was not limited to private homes. It was also reflected in the construction of public buildings, such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art, opened in 1880, and the Museum of Natural History, opened in 1877, both designed in the classical Beaux Arts style to emphasize their importance as cultural institutions. The period of industrialization and innovation from the mid-1800s to the late 1800s was transformative for New York City's architectural development. Skyscrapers redefined the skyline, and the popularity of brownstones and row houses shaped the city's residential fabric. The Beaux Arts movement left a lasting imprint on both public and private buildings, symbolizing the opulence and ambition of the Gilded Age. Public infrastructure, especially railroads, bridged the gap between neighborhoods and facilitated the growth of a sprawling urban landscape. Finally, the wealth and opulence of the Gilded Age's elite left a lasting legacy on the city, with monumental landmarks reflecting the ambition and access of an era that transformed New York into a global metropolis. Chapter 3: The Birth of the Skyscraper. Early 1900s. The early 20th century witnessed a profound shift in the urban landscape of New York City. The advent of the skyscraper marked one of the most significant architectural revolutions in history, reshaping the skyline and the very idea of what a city could be. Skyscrapers became the epitome of progress, technological achievement, and modernity. This chapter explores the origins of the skyscraper, the pioneering architects who made it possible, the iconic buildings that symbolized this new era, the role of technological advancements like the steel frame, and the early influence of urban planning and zoning laws in shaping the city's development. 1. The first skyscrapers, a revolution in design. The early skyscrapers in New York City represented a radical departure from traditional building techniques and design. The term skyscraper itself emerged in the late 19th century as a way to describe the new breed of tall buildings that were rising in major urban centers, particularly in New York. The first skyscrapers were initially made possible by advancements in structural engineering, including the development of the steel frame, which allowed for taller buildings without the need for load-bearing walls. Before the steel frame, buildings were constrained by the weight of their materials, and their height was limited by the load-bearing capacity of masonry walls. However, with the steel skeleton, the internal structure could bear the weight of the building, allowing for the creation of much taller and more complex designs. Early skyscrapers were designed with an emphasis on verticality, with sharp lines and large windows that conveyed a sense of modernity. These buildings were often rectangular in shape, with flat roofs and minimal ornamentation. The move towards functionalism in design was evident, as skyscrapers were conceived as pragmatic structures designed to maximize space in crowded urban environments, allowing cities like New York to expand upward instead of outward. One of the most important early skyscrapers was the Flatiron Building, completed in 1902. Designed by architect Daniel Burnham, the building was one of the first to be recognized as a true skyscraper. The triangular shape of the building was dictated by the intersection of Broadway and Fifth Avenue, but it also became iconic for its unique appearance. The Flatiron signaled a new era of architecture, where form followed function, and the building's relatively simple, yet striking design symbolized the energy and ambition of the city. 2. The influence of architects like Louis Sullivan and Daniel Burnham. Two architects, in particular, played pivotal roles in shaping the early skyscraper design. Louis Sullivan and Daniel Burnham. Both men are considered founding figures of modern architecture, and their work laid the groundwork for the birth of the skyscraper. Louis Sullivan, often referred to as the father of the skyscraper, championed the idea that a building's form should reflect its function. Sullivan's work emphasized the importance of a building's vertical lines, which were suited to the vertical nature of skyscrapers. He famously coined the phrase, "form follows function," advocating for designs that prioritized practicality and simplicity over ornamental decoration. Sullivan's influence can be seen in the design of Chicago's Auditorium Building and the Carson, Pirie, Scott and Company Building, which showcased his ideas about skyscraper design. Sullivan's work emphasized lightness and transparency, seeking to create open, functional interior spaces and sleek exteriors that symbolized the new industrial era. While Sullivan's architectural philosophy was key to the development of the skyscraper, Daniel Burnham was equally instrumental in making the skyscraper an icon of modernity. Burnham's work, especially as part of the Burnham and Root partnership in Chicago, helped shape the future of skyscraper design. His focus was on urban planning and large-scale projects, and he became known for his ability to design buildings that were both functional and grand in scale. Burnham's most famous work is the Flatiron Building in New York, which demonstrated his commitment to creating iconic, monumental structures that would anchor a city's skyline. Additionally, Burnham's plan for Chicago, 1909, helped shape the development of the modern city, with a focus on creating open spaces, better transportation networks, and a more organized urban layout. His influence would extend into New York, where he would eventually become involved in the design of several important skyscrapers. 3. Early iconic buildings: the Woolworth Building and the Flatiron Building. Two early skyscrapers in New York City that embody the spirit of the new era are the Woolworth Building and the Flatiron Building. The Woolworth Building, 1913, was a landmark in the development of the skyscraper. Designed by architect Cass Gilbert, it was at the time the tallest building in the world and stood as a beacon of New York's rise as the epicenter of finance and business. At 792 feet and 57 stories tall, the Woolworth Building's neo-Gothic design combined classical elements with modern engineering. Its ornate limestone facade and decorative spires pointed towards the future while celebrating the city's connection to its historic past. The building's steel frame construction allowed it to achieve unprecedented heights, and its elevators helped transform the experience of working and living in high-rise buildings. Its height and luxurious design made it a symbol of American commercial power. The Flatiron Building, designed by Daniel Burnham and completed in 1902, was another groundbreaking structure. While it was not as tall as the Woolworth Building, the Flatiron's triangular shape set it apart from other buildings in the city. Located at the junction of Broadway and Fifth Avenue, the building's location and design allowed it to maximize its footprint in an increasingly crowded urban environment. The Flatiron was an early example of the use of steel framing in skyscrapers, and its striking appearance became one of New York's most recognizable landmarks, symbolizing both the modern city and the era's growing architectural ambition. Both buildings, though different in design, exemplified the shift toward verticality and the creation of structures that were not only functional but also became symbols of a new age in urban development. They marked the beginning of an era in which skyscrapers would define the New York skyline and set the stage for the city's growth into a global center of finance and culture. 4. The role of technology and the steel frame. The development of the steel frame was one of the most important technological innovations that made the skyscraper possible. Prior to the widespread use of steel, buildings had to rely on masonry and stone to support their weight, which limited how tall they could be built. Steel, however, was both strong and lightweight, allowing buildings to rise higher without sacrificing structural integrity. Steel frames were created by assembling a skeleton of vertical steel beams and horizontal girders, which formed the framework of the building. This framework could bear the weight of the building's floors and external walls, leaving the interior open for use. The invention of the elevator further supported the growth of skyscrapers by allowing people to easily move between floors, making vertical buildings more practical and accessible. The combination of the steel frame and the elevator allowed for the development of tall, thin buildings with large windows that maximized natural light and airflow. Curtain walls, made from glass or metal, could be hung from the frame, giving skyscrapers their sleek, modern look. The design and construction of these buildings were a testament to the advances in engineering and materials science, marking a revolutionary shift in the way buildings were conceived and constructed. 5. Zoning laws and the rise of urban planning. As New York's skyline began to fill with towering skyscrapers, the city faced new challenges related to congestion, shadowing, and the potential negative impact of unchecked growth. The rise of skyscrapers led to the introduction of zoning laws and the increased importance of urban planning to regulate the city's expansion. In 1916, New York became the first city in the United States to pass a comprehensive zoning resolution, aimed at addressing the growing concerns about overdevelopment and the relationship between building height, density, and open space. The zoning laws introduced a set of rules that determined the size and shape of buildings, including how far they could extend over the sidewalk, the angle at which they could rise, and the amount of light and air that had to be allowed to reach the streets below. These zoning laws were a direct response to the mansionization of New York, in which large, blocky skyscrapers were being constructed without regard for the surrounding neighborhood or public space. The zoning regulations sought to limit the density of buildings while preserving the character and livability of neighborhoods. The zoning laws and urban planning efforts that followed helped shape New York into a city that balanced the ambitions of skyscraper construction with the needs of its residents. Over time, these planning efforts would evolve to address concerns about traffic, accessibility, and public amenities, ensuring that New York could continue to grow while providing a livable environment for its citizens. The early 20th century marked the true birth of the skyscraper in New York City, revolutionizing both the city's skyline and its architectural identity. Architects like Louis Sullivan and Daniel Burnham laid the groundwork for the new era of vertical urbanism, creating designs that focused on function and practicality. Early iconic skyscrapers like the Woolworth Building and Flatiron Building showcased the power of steel framing and modern engineering, marking the beginning of a new architectural era. As the city grew taller, new zoning laws and urban planning efforts emerged to ensure that the skyscraper revolution could continue without sacrificing livability. The birth of the skyscraper in New York City was not just a technological innovation, but a cultural and economic milestone that helped define the city as the global metropolis it is today. Chapter 4: Art Deco and the Rise of Modernism, 1920s to the 1930s. The 1920s and 1930s were transformative decades for New York City's architectural landscape. The period witnessed the flourishing of the Art Deco movement and the rise of modernism, as new materials, technologies, and design philosophies reshaped the city's skyline and cultural identity. The Art Deco style was an embodiment of the Jazz Age, representing a departure from the ornate historical styles that preceded it, and offering a new, streamlined aesthetic for a rapidly modernizing world. Alongside this, the International style brought an entirely new approach to architecture, emphasizing functionality, clean lines, and minimalism. This chapter explores the impact of Art Deco on New York's skyline, the creation of some of the city's most iconic buildings, and the legacy of this transformative era in architecture. 1. The Art Deco movement in New York City. The Art Deco movement, which emerged in France before spreading globally in the 1920s and 1930s, had a profound impact on architecture, interior design, fashion, and the visual arts. In New York City, the Art Deco style became synonymous with the Roaring Twenties, a time of excess, prosperity, and technological innovation. The movement reflected the optimism of the era, celebrating modern technology, luxury, and speed, while offering an aesthetic that blended industrial design with artistic flourishes. Art Deco was characterized by its geometric shapes, bold lines, and luxurious materials. The style was often marked by its use of zigzags, chevrons, fluted columns, and sunburst motifs. It also made use of modern materials like steel, chrome, glass, and aluminum, often paired with more traditional materials like marble, wood, and stained glass to create contrast. In New York, Art Deco became closely associated with the development of the city's growing skyscraper culture. Buildings designed in this style often sought to combine aesthetic beauty with functional efficiency, giving rise to structures that were both monumental and graceful. These buildings were often tall, reflecting New York's ambition to reach new heights in terms of both technology and culture. The rise of Art Deco in New York coincided with the city's economic boom, and as skyscrapers began to dominate the skyline, Art Deco became a symbol of the city's modernity and international stature. The stylish geometric forms and sleek designs helped define New York's architectural identity during this period, making it an enduring symbol of both luxury and progress. 2. Iconic skyscrapers. The Empire State Building and Rockefeller Center. Two of New York City's most iconic buildings were constructed during the height of the Art Deco movement. The Empire State Building and Rockefeller Center. These buildings not only embody the best of Art Deco design but also serve as symbols of the city's architectural ambition and global influence. The Empire State Building, completed in 1931, is arguably the most iconic skyscraper in the world. Standing at 1,454 feet, including its antenna, and with 102 stories, it was the tallest building in the world at the time of its completion, a title it held for nearly 40 years. Designed by architect William F. Lamb of the architectural firm Shreve, Lamb and Harmon, the Empire State Building is a quintessential example of Art Deco architecture, with its streamlined, vertical lines and the use of polished limestone and aluminum. The building's facade is adorned with fluted details and sunburst patterns, adding to its sleek, modern appearance. Its towering presence on the skyline has made it a symbol of both New York City and American industrial power. Rockefeller Center, completed in stages between 1930 and 1939, is another monumental Art Deco achievement that shaped New York's mid-20th century landscape. A complex of 19 commercial buildings, the center was designed by Raymond Hood and other architects. It became a symbol of corporate and cultural success. The geometric Art Deco style of the center, most visible in buildings like 30 Rockefeller Plaza, the RCA Building, now known as 30 Rockefeller Plaza or the GE Building, is marked by clean, sharp lines, carved stone reliefs, and large decorative motifs. The center's most famous feature, the Rockefeller Plaza Ice Skating Rink, and the annual Christmas tree are cultural landmarks in their own right. Both of these buildings represent the height of New York's Art Deco period and exemplify the new aesthetic direction that was emerging in the world of architecture. These projects also pushed the limits of engineering and construction technology, helping to define the city as a global center of architectural and commercial innovation. 3. The intersection of architecture and art. One of the defining features of the Art Deco movement was its fusion of architecture and art. with many buildings from the era being conceived not only as functional structures but as artistic masterpieces. Art Deco embraced the idea that architecture was more than just a practical pursuit. It could also be a form of visual expression and a medium for storytelling. Art Deco buildings often incorporated artistic embellishments such as frescoes, murals, sculptures, and ornate detailing. This integration of fine art with architecture was particularly evident in New York, where skyscrapers and public buildings frequently featured collaborations between architects and artists. Notable examples include the Radio City Music Hall, 1932, which was designed by architect Edward Durell Stone in collaboration with renowned artists like Ralph McGill and Seymour Felix. The lobby of the music hall was decorated with beautiful murals and sculptures in the Art Deco style, including frescoes that captured the spirit of the times. Similarly, the Chrysler Building, 1930, another iconic skyscraper, features elegant interior designs by artist Rene Chamberlain and William H. V. Powell. The artistic integration in these buildings also served as a means to elevate the public's experience, making the buildings themselves immersive, sensory environments. Rather than being simply functional, buildings became works of artistic expression, reflecting both the aspirations and cultural values of the era. 4. The influence of the international style. While Art Deco was the dominant architectural style in New York City in the 1920s and 1930s, the international style also began to emerge during this period, particularly in the 1930s. The international style was characterized by minimalism, functionalism, and the rejection of historical ornamentation in favor of a more utilitarian approach. The international style emphasized the use of modern materials such as steel, glass, and concrete, and its buildings were typically designed with rectilinear forms and open floor plans. Windows were often large and unadorned, allowing for maximum natural light and a sense of openness. This style was deeply influenced by European architects like Le Corbusier and Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, who sought to create buildings that were both efficient and universal, devoid of any regional or historical references. In New York, the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, designed by Philip Johnson and Edward Durell Stone in the late 1930s, was one of the first buildings to exemplify the international style. The rise of the international style would have a significant impact on New York's architectural evolution, especially after World War II, when it became the dominant form of modern architecture in the city and around the world. Though the Art Deco style and the international style often coexisted in New York, they represented two very different architectural philosophies, one celebrating ornamentation, luxury, and historic references, and the other prioritizing simplicity, function, and modernity. Together, they laid the groundwork for the architectural future of the city. 5. New York's Art Deco buildings and their legacy. New York's Art Deco buildings, many of which remain as part of the city's skyline today, continue to represent the elegance and ambition of the early 20th century. These buildings are not just historical relics. They serve as ongoing symbols of New York's identity as a global center of culture, commerce, and innovation. The Empire State Building, Rockefeller Center, Chrysler Building, and Radio City Music Hall are just a few examples of Art Deco buildings that have become landmarks in the city. These buildings remain popular not only for their aesthetic beauty but for their representation of an era of prosperity, optimism, and transformation in New York and the world. The legacy of Art Deco in New York also extends to the realm of design and interior decoration, with many buildings incorporating iconic Art Deco furniture, lighting, and mosaics that continue to influence design today. The style's emphasis on geometric shapes, sleek lines, and luxurious materials remains a key influence on modern architecture. Moreover, The intersection of architecture and art during the Art Deco era established the city as a leader in architectural innovation and cultural expression, influencing generations of architects and designers. As a symbol of New York's resilience and forward-thinking spirit, the Art Deco buildings constructed during this era have continued to inspire admiration, preservation efforts, and architectural study. The 1920s and 1930s marked a golden era for New York's skyline, driven by the Art Deco movement and the rise of modernism. The Empire State Building, Rockefeller Center, and other iconic buildings from this period reflect the aesthetic and technological advancements of the era while embodying the cultural confidence and ambition of the time. Through their bold designs and integration of artistic elements, these buildings continue to serve as cultural touchstones and stand as testaments to New York's role as an international architectural and artistic hub. As these Art Deco structures have become a lasting part of the city's identity, their legacy persists, inspiring future generations to continue shaping New York's ever-evolving skyline. Chapter 5: Post-War Modernism and Urban Transformation, 1940s to the 1960s. Following World War II, New York City underwent an era of significant architectural change, driven by the forces of modernism, urban renewal, and rapid economic expansion. This period witnessed the rise of post-war modernism, the proliferation of new building types, and the transformation of the city's skyline. At the same time, the city's urban landscape was reshaped through controversial decisions, including the destruction of many historic neighborhoods in favor of modernist urban planning. Brutalism and the rise of the glass box building further defined the character of the city during this time. This chapter delves into the ways in which architecture after World War II reshaped New York, from the bold experimentation in modernist forms to the social and political consequences of urban development. 1. Modernism after World War II. After World War II, New York City embraced post-war modernism, which reflected the broad social, economic, and technological changes occurring in the world. The international style, which emerged in the 1930s, continued to dominate architecture in the post-war period. However, the impact of the war, the growing importance of technological innovation, and the booming economy pushed architects to explore even more ambitious and abstract designs, leading to a distinct branch of modernism. In this period, architects embraced rationality and functionalism while making use of new building materials such as steel, concrete, and glass. These materials allowed for greater flexibility and efficiency, leading to the creation of larger, more utilitarian structures. The clean lines, open spaces, and minimalist ornamentation of modernist buildings continued to embody the values of efficiency and progress, making them a symbol of a world recovering from war and looking toward the future. However, the post-war modernist buildings also signified the growing alienation felt in the face of the increasing scale of urban development. The optimism of the early modernist movements began to give way to a more critical examination of the social impact of architecture and urban planning. Notable examples from the post-war modernist period include Le Corbusier's influence, with his ideals being embodied in buildings like the United Nations headquarters, completed in 1952. This structure combined internationalism with modernist ideals, symbolizing a new era of cooperation and forward-thinking design. 2. The impact of urban renewal and the destruction of historic neighborhoods. In the post-war period, urban renewal projects, driven by the federal government and city planners, led to widespread demolition of older neighborhoods, particularly in Manhattan. The idea was to modernize the city, remove blighted areas, and create new spaces for businesses and housing to accommodate the growing population. However, these ambitious urban planning efforts often led to the destruction of historic districts, displacing long-standing communities in the process. The most infamous example of this was the redevelopment of Herald Square, which led to the demolition of several historic buildings in favor of new office towers. Similarly, much of the Lower East Side and the Bronx were radically altered, with low-income housing projects often replacing old buildings and tenement houses. Urban renewal also contributed to the decline of some neighborhoods, as displaced residents found it difficult to return to newly constructed developments. One of the most significant consequences of urban renewal was the creation of large-scale housing projects and office towers that dominated the city's landscape. While some areas were revitalized, the overall result was the loss of unique historical architecture and the disintegration of close-knit neighborhoods. This era of urban renewal remains controversial due to its social consequences and its lasting impact on the cultural fabric of New York. 3. The construction of brutalist architecture. During the 1950s and 1960s, the architectural style known as brutalism became a dominant force in New York City's urban landscape. Characterized by raw concrete, exposed structures, and an emphasis on mass and form over ornamentation, brutalism was a radical departure from the more refined styles of earlier years. This style sought to express honesty and directness, with buildings often looking rough and unfinished, emphasizing functionality over aesthetic concerns. Brutalism arose as a response to both the optimistic international style and the excesses of consumer-driven culture, pushing against the clean, polished aesthetic of modernism. It aimed to create a sense of authenticity, with buildings appearing strong and monumental. One of the best-known examples of brutalist architecture in New York is the Metropolitan Government Building, often referred to as the Bronx Courthouse, built in 1961. Its heavy concrete exterior and massive, imposing form stand in stark contrast to the more refined designs of earlier buildings. Similarly, the PS 64 school building in the East Village, designed by architect Morris Lapidus, exemplified the brutalist style with its use of concrete and angular, geometric shapes. Despite the bold and striking nature of brutalism, it quickly became controversial. Critics derided its perceived coldness, harshness, and lack of humanity, while proponents argued that brutalism's straightforwardness reflected the rawness of modern life. Today, brutalism has become an important chapter in New York's architectural history, with some of its buildings becoming recognized for their boldness and historic significance. 4. The rise of the glass box building. The glass box building emerged as a distinctive architectural form in post-war New York, a response to the modernist ideals that sought transparency, openness, and simplicity. This building type was characterized by its glass curtain walls, exterior facades composed entirely of glass, often framed in steel or aluminum. The transparent nature of these buildings symbolized a shift toward more democratic, open spaces, aligning with the ideals of the post-war period that emphasized efficiency, lightness, and connectivity with the outside world. The most iconic example of the glass box building in New York is Lever House, 1952, designed by Gordon Bunshaft of Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. This building was one of the first to adopt a glass curtain wall, which completely revolutionized the city's skyscraper design. Lever House set a precedent for many corporate office buildings that followed in the post-war years, reflecting a new era of architectural innovation. Another well-known glass box building is One Chase Manhattan Plaza, 1961, designed by architect I.M. Pei. This towering, minimalist structure with its sleek glass exterior embodied the corporate America of the 1960s. The glass box represented a break from the dense, ornamented skyscrapers of the earlier part of the 20th century and emphasized transparency and simplicity. While the glass box buildings are often praised for their clean lines and modern aesthetics, they have been critiqued for their uniformity and perceived lack of individuality. Despite this, the glass box building remains one of the defining building types of the post-war period in New York and other major cities. 5. Architects who shaped post-war New York. Several key architects had a profound influence on the development of New York's post-war skyline, helping to shape the city's modernist identity in the 1940s to 1960s. These architects not only designed some of the city's most recognizable buildings but also defined architectural movements that would leave a lasting imprint on the city's urban landscape. Walter Gropius, the founder of the Bauhaus School in Germany, brought his modernist ideas to New York in the post-war years. His work on the Harvard Graduate Center, 1949, and later projects in New York helped establish the international style in American architecture. I. M. Pei, one of the most influential architects of the 20th century, designed several landmark buildings in New York, including One Chase Manhattan Plaza and the East Building of the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Pei's work in New York marked the rise of modernist skyscrapers with sleek glass facades. Philip Johnson, originally a proponent of the international style, later became a key figure in the rise of postmodernism. His work includes the design of the Glass House in Connecticut, as well as major buildings in New York, like the AT&T Building, now Sony Tower, which is one of the first examples of postmodern architecture in the city. These architects, along with others like Eero Saarinen, Gordon Bunshaft, and Morris Lapidus, played essential roles in reshaping New York after World War II, creating iconic buildings that still define the city's skyline today. The post-war era was a period of dramatic transformation for New York's architectural landscape. From the rise of post-war modernism and the controversial impact of urban renewal to the creation of brutalist and glass box buildings, the 1940s to 1960s witnessed an era of bold experimentation and reshaping of the city. These architectural movements not only altered the city's skyline but also influenced the social fabric of New York, with debates about the preservation of historic neighborhoods continuing to shape urban policy. The architects of this period, including the pioneers of modernism and brutalism, left an indelible mark on New York's architectural legacy, shaping its future for generations to come. Chapter 6: New York in the 21st Century. Sustainability and Design for the Future. 2000s. Present. The 21st century has brought a new era of architectural evolution in New York City, shaped by a combination of environmental awareness, technological innovation, and a renewed focus on urban resilience. As the city faces the challenges of climate change, population growth, and shifting cultural values, architects have turned to sustainability and adaptive reuse as key strategies for creating future-proof urban spaces. This chapter explores the defining architectural trends of the past 2 decades, from the rise of green architecture to the symbolic rebuilding of Lower Manhattan after the September 11th attacks, and examines the key figures and projects that are helping to shape New York's future skyline. 1. The emergence of green architecture and sustainability. As environmental concerns have become more pressing, New York has seen a significant shift towards sustainable architecture in the 21st century. Architects have increasingly focused on designing buildings that reduce their environmental footprint while promoting a healthy and efficient urban environment. Green architecture has emerged as a response to the city's growing population and its need for energy-efficient, resource-conscious design. The use of renewable energy sources, such as solar panels and wind turbines, has become more common, and sustainable building materials like recycled steel, eco-friendly concrete, and insulated glass are now central to the design of many new buildings. Additionally, modern energy-efficient systems, such as high-performance HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, LED lighting, and green roofs, have helped reduce the carbon footprint of urban development. LEED. Leadership in energy and environmental design. Certification has become a standard for measuring sustainability, and many of New York's recent projects have achieved this recognition. One of the most notable examples is the Bank of America Tower, 2009, which became the first skyscraper in the city to achieve LEED Platinum certification, the highest level of sustainability. The building incorporates features such as rainwater harvesting, energy-efficient lighting, and a green roof that helps reduce the urban heat island effect. Another significant example is the One Bryant Park, 2009, which is renowned for its commitment to environmental sustainability and was designed with the goal of setting a new benchmark for high-performance, green architecture in New York. These green initiatives represent a broader trend in the city where sustainability and innovation in design are becoming integral to the architectural identity of the 21st century. 2. The rebirth of Lower Manhattan. The 9/11 Memorial and One World Trade Center. The events of September 11, 2001, marked a defining moment in New York City's history, and their aftermath catalyzed a massive rebuilding effort in Lower Manhattan. The reconstruction of the World Trade Center site became a symbol of resilience and renewal, resulting in several iconic architectural projects that reflect the city's determination to rise from the ashes of tragedy. At the heart of this transformation is the One World Trade Center, 2013, also known as the Freedom Tower, designed by architect David Childs of Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. Standing at 1,776 feet, it is the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere and represents not only a physical rebuilding of the skyline but also a profound symbol of American strength and recovery. The design incorporates sustainable features, including a high-performance curtain wall system that reduces energy consumption, and the building's shape was inspired by the symbolism of a spire reaching towards the sky, echoing themes of hope and freedom. Adjacent to the tower is the 9/11 Memorial, 2011, designed by Michael Arad and Peter Walker. The memorial's reflecting pools sit in the footprints of the original Twin Towers, serving as a poignant reminder of the lives lost. The site includes trees, pathways, and spaces for reflection, blending elements of landscape architecture with its memorial purpose. The 9/11 Museum, also on the site, houses artifacts from the attacks and tells the story of that fateful day, ensuring that the history and lessons of 9/11 will be passed down to future generations. This entire revitalization of Lower Manhattan is more than just about rebuilding. It is a testament to how architecture can respond to trauma and serve as an emblem of renewal, resilience, and unity. The ongoing transformation of the area remains a powerful reminder of the city's ability to face adversity and emerge stronger. 3. The High Line and adaptive reuse of old buildings. One of the most innovative and beloved developments in New York in the 21st century has been the transformation of the High Line, an elevated railway track turned public park. Located on the west side of Manhattan, the High Line was built in the 1930s as a freight railway that ran through the meatpacking district in Chelsea before being abandoned in the 1980s. In the early 2000s, a group of local residents and activists, including Joshua David and Robert Hammond, spearheaded the effort to convert the railway into an elevated park, preserving its historical structure while transforming it into a green urban space. Designed by landscape architects James Corner Field Operations and architects Diller Scofidio plus Renfro, the park combines elements of landscape design, public art, and urban ecology. The park not only brings much-needed green space to the city but also stimulates the surrounding area's development, attracting residents, businesses, and tourists. The adaptive reuse of the High Line serves as a model for urban revitalization and has influenced similar projects around the world. The adaptive reuse of older buildings has also become a significant trend in New York's 21st century architecture. Instead of demolishing historic structures, architects have turned to repurposing and refurbishing them for new uses. The Whitney Museum of American Art, now relocated to the Meatpacking District, in its new building designed by Renzo Piano, is an example of the intersection between modern architecture and adaptive reuse, where the structure is not just a museum but also part of the city's ongoing architectural dialogue. 4. The influence of contemporary architects and designs. Contemporary architects have brought fresh ideas, new technologies, and innovative approaches to New York City's evolving architectural scene. As the city continues to grow and face new challenges, architects have embraced experimentation and collaboration across disciplines. Architects like Norman Foster, Zaha Hadid, and Georg Ingels have designed some of the city's most visionary buildings, blending sustainability, cutting-edge design, and technology. Zaha Hadid's 215 West 18th Street, 2016, is a striking example of her futuristic, curvilinear style. Georg Ingels, known for his playful and sustainable designs, has contributed projects like the Spiral, 2022, a skyscraper that incorporates green spaces and aims to integrate urban ecology with architecture. These architects, along with Shigeru Ban, David Adjaye, and Jean Nouvel, represent the global influence on New York architecture. They bring diverse design philosophies and responses to the city's unique challenges, contributing to the eclecticism that defines the city's architectural evolution. 5. Future trends in New York architecture. As New York looks to the future, several key trends are poised to shape its architectural development in the coming decades. Sustainable and net zero buildings. The future of New York's architecture will be deeply rooted in sustainability, with a growing emphasis on net zero energy buildings. The city has set ambitious carbon neutral goals, and architects are increasingly tasked with creating buildings that not only reduce their environmental impact but also generate their own energy through renewable sources like solar power. Smart cities and technology. As technology continues to evolve, New York will likely see the integration of smart technologies into its infrastructure. From smart lighting and traffic systems to data-driven building management and automation, these innovations will help improve efficiency, reduce waste, and create more responsive urban environments. Resilience to climate change. New York will need to address its vulnerability to rising sea levels and extreme weather events caused by climate change. In response, architects are designing buildings and public spaces with flood resilience in mind, incorporating features like floating foundations and elevated structures. Vertical gardens and urban farming. As urban spaces become more crowded, there will likely be a greater focus on integrating green spaces into buildings through vertical gardens, green roofs, and urban farming initiatives, transforming the city's rooftops and facades into thriving ecosystems. The 21st century has ushered in a new era of architectural innovation in New York City, with a strong emphasis on sustainability, resilience, and adaptive reuse. From the greening of the city's skyline to the rebuilding of Lower Manhattan after 9/11, these developments highlight how architecture responds to the needs of both the environment and the people. As New York continues to face new challenges, architects will play an essential role in creating a more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive city. The trends discussed in this chapter suggest that the future of New York architecture will be defined by cutting-edge technology, environmental stewardship, and an ongoing commitment to innovative design that respects the city's historic roots while preparing it for the challenges of tomorrow. Chapter 7. Iconic Neighborhoods and Districts. New York City's diverse architectural landscape is not just a collection of individual buildings but a reflection of its iconic neighborhoods, each with its unique architectural history and cultural identity. From the historic brownstones of Brooklyn to the industrial remnants of the Bronx, and the modern skyline of Queens to the hidden gems of Staten Island, every borough tells its own architectural story. This chapter explores the architectural evolution of New York's most important neighborhoods and districts, delving into the distinctive styles that have defined them over the years. It also examines the critical role of historic preservation in maintaining the city's rich architectural heritage. 1. The architectural history of Manhattan. Manhattan, as the core of New York City, has played a central role in shaping the city's architectural identity. The island's architecture reflects the city's transformation from a colonial outpost to a global metropolis. Its distinctive skyline is made up of towering skyscrapers, historic brownstones, Beaux Arts masterpieces, and modernist icons, each representing a different phase in the city's development. Early colonial architecture. Manhattan's architectural roots trace back to its Dutch colonial period in the early 17th century. Dutch settlers built the first wooden houses, many of which were simple, one-story buildings, often with gambrel roofs. The New Amsterdam settlement, which later became New York City, was marked by modest structures, reflecting the colonial emphasis on practical, functional design. Stone buildings such as St. Mark's Church in the Bowery, established in 1660, and the Francis Tavern, dating back to 1719, represent some of the earliest examples of European colonial architecture in New York. Georgian and Federal styles. As the city grew in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, Manhattan saw the rise of Georgian and Federal style buildings, characterized by symmetry, brick facades, and classical detailing. This period laid the foundation for neighborhoods like Greenwich Village, which contains several well-preserved examples of this architectural style. The rise of skyscrapers. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Manhattan's skyline began to take shape with the construction of the first skyscrapers. Architects like Louis Sullivan and Daniel Burnham revolutionized architecture with their designs for steel frame buildings, such as the Flatiron Building and the Woolworth Building. These towering structures epitomized the city's ambition and growth, marking the beginning of its iconic skyline. Modern Manhattan. Today, Manhattan's architecture is defined by a mix of historical preservation and innovative skyscrapers, including One World Trade Center and the Chrysler Building. The juxtaposition of Art Deco, modernist, and postmodernist designs with older structures creates a visual narrative of the city's evolution. 2. Brooklyn. A transformation of style and culture. Brooklyn's architectural identity has undergone a dramatic transformation over the past century. From its industrial roots to its status as a cultural and architectural haven, Brooklyn's neighborhoods are marked by a diverse range of architectural styles, from row houses and brownstones to lofts and modern apartment complexes. Each district in Brooklyn has contributed to its distinct cultural and architectural flavor. 19th century architecture. Many of Brooklyn's neighborhoods, such as Park Slope, Brooklyn Heights, and Fort Greene, are lined with brownstones, a symbol of the borough's historical wealth and prosperity. These row houses, typically built between the mid-19th and early 20th centuries, feature high ceilings, wooden moldings, and decorative facades. Brooklyn Heights remains one of the best preserved examples of 19th century architecture, with its cobblestone streets and stately homes offering a glimpse into the borough's past. Industrial Brooklyn. As Brooklyn became a center of industrial activity, neighborhoods like Dumbo, down under the Manhattan Bridge overpass, and Williamsburg saw the rise of large factories, warehouses, and lofts. These structures have since been repurposed into modern residential buildings and art spaces, contributing to Brooklyn's reputation as an artistic hub. Contemporary Brooklyn. The early 21st century has brought rapid gentrification to many Brooklyn neighborhoods, resulting in the rise of sleek high-rise apartment buildings, such as those found in downtown Brooklyn and Brooklyn Navy Yard. Despite the influx of new developments, Brooklyn remains committed to preserving its historical character, with efforts to safeguard the architectural heritage of neighborhoods like Carroll Gardens and Greenpoint. 3. The Bronx. Industrial heritage and residential development. The Bronx, New York's northernmost borough, has long been defined by its industrial heritage, but over the past several decades, it has also become a center for residential development and cultural resurgence. Architecture in the Bronx reflects this dual identity, with a mixture of early 20th century industrial buildings, modernist public housing, and newer residential developments. Early industrial architecture. The Bronx industrial past is still visible in the factories, warehouses, and storage facilities that once defined the borough's skyline. Neighborhoods like Mott Haven and Port Morris feature some of the last remaining examples of 19th-century industrial architecture, with their distinctive red brick buildings and large windows designed for manufacturing. Public housing and urban renewal. Post-World War II, the Bronx became a center for the construction of large-scale public housing projects designed to accommodate the borough's growing population. These include the iconic Co-op City and the Soundview houses, which embody the mid-20th century modernist and brutalist styles. While some of these housing developments have been criticized for their lack of community integration, they also represent a significant chapter in the borough's urban history. Gentrification and new development. In recent years, the Bronx has seen a resurgence of interest in residential development, particularly along the waterfront in areas like the South Bronx. New, mixed-use buildings have begun to rise alongside older structures, helping to revitalize areas once thought to be in decline. However, concerns about gentrification and displacement have also accompanied these changes. 4. Queens and Staten Island. Hidden architectural gems. While Manhattan and Brooklyn often take center stage in architectural discussions, Queens and Staten Island also boast unique architectural gems and offer glimpses into New York's more suburban and eclectic side. Queens. The borough is known for its diversity, and this is reflected in its architecture. In neighborhoods like Astoria, Jackson Heights, and Flushing, one can find a mix of architectural styles, from early 20th century row houses to mid-century apartment buildings, with an infusion of international influences, particularly from the borough's large immigrant population. Queens is also home to several iconic cultural buildings, such as the Queens Museum and the Citi Field Ballpark. Staten Island. Often seen as the least developed of New York's 5 boroughs, Staten Island is known for its historical homes, Victorian architecture, and natural beauty. Areas like St. George and Stapleton offer charming examples of 19th-century houses, while the Staten Island Greenbelt is home to mid-20th century ranch-style homes. Staten Island's waterfront areas also contain modern architectural designs that capitalize on views of the Statue of Liberty and New York Harbor. 5. The role of historic preservation in New York's neighborhoods. Historic preservation has played a vital role in maintaining the cultural and architectural heritage of New York's neighborhoods. As the city continues to grow, the importance of preserving its historical buildings and landmarks has become ever more apparent. Landmarks Preservation Commission. Established in 1965, the Landmarks Preservation Commission, LPC, plays a crucial role in protecting and preserving New York's architectural legacy. The commission oversees the designation of landmarks in historic districts, ensuring that significant buildings are preserved for future generations. Some of New York's most iconic neighborhoods, including Greenwich Village, Brooklyn Heights, and Soho, are now landmarked districts that offer a glimpse into the city's architectural past. Adaptive reuse. In addition to protecting existing structures, historic preservation often involves repurposing old buildings for new uses. This approach helps maintain the character of neighborhoods while meeting the demands of modern development. Notable examples include the transformation of the Battery Maritime building into a luxury hotel and the Pier 57 project, which is being converted into a mixed-use space with retail, offices, and public parks. Challenges and controversies. While historic preservation has many supporters, it also faces challenges. The debate over whether to preserve certain buildings or allow for redevelopment often raises questions about urban growth, housing affordability, and preserving diversity in neighborhoods. As New York City continues to evolve, the balance between preserving history and embracing the future remains an ongoing conversation. New York City's neighborhoods represent the complex intersection of history, culture, and architecture. From the historical districts of Manhattan to the industrial heritage of the Bronx, the artistic transformation of Brooklyn, and the suburban charm of Staten Island and Queens, each area offers a unique perspective on the city's architectural evolution. The role of historic preservation remains vital in maintaining the city's legacy while adapting to new demands for housing and development. As New York continues to grow, the challenge will be to balance the preservation of its rich architectural history with the need for modern innovation and urban resilience. Chapter 8: The Role of Architecture in New York's Identity. Architecture in New York City is not just a functional or aesthetic feature, it is an integral part of the city's identity. The city's architecture reflects its history, its values, its social dynamics, and its evolution as a global cultural and economic powerhouse. From the iconic skyscrapers that define its skyline to the brownstones that represent its neighborhoods, architecture plays a vital role in shaping how New Yorkers see themselves and how the world views the city. This chapter explores the role of architecture in defining New York's identity, examining how it mirrors social and political change, accommodates diverse cultures, and reflects the tension between preservation and modernization. 1. Architecture as a reflection of social and political change. New York City's architecture has long mirrored the social, political, and economic shifts that have shaped the nation and the world. Buildings are more than just structures. They are expressions of the era in which they were created and the forces driving change. Colonial and early American period. Early architecture in New York reflected its colonial roots, influenced by Dutch settlers, and later, British rule. The shift from European styles to a uniquely American identity can be seen in the evolution of early public buildings, churches, and residences, reflecting the nation's quest for independence. The Gilded Age and economic growth. The late 19th century's Gilded Age was a time of rapid industrialization, and New York's skyline began to reflect the city's booming economy. Architecture became a symbol of wealth and social power, with the construction of monumental Beaux Arts buildings, such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art and Grand Central Terminal, which represented the city's rise as a center of finance and culture. Post-war urban development. In the mid-20th century, the impact of World War II and the rise of modernism led to a new wave of urban design that sought to reflect the city's economic prosperity, as well as its new political and social realities. The post-war skyscraper boom, with buildings like the United Nations headquarters and the Rockefeller Center, signaled a new era in international diplomacy and business. Modern-day shifts. Today, New York's architecture reflects an evolving society. The 9/11 tragedy and the rebuilding of the World Trade Center stand as symbols of resilience and recovery, reflecting the city's ongoing response to political and social events. The development of One World Trade Center is a powerful reminder of the city's ability to reinvent itself after crisis, symbolizing both loss and renewal. 2. The relationship between architecture and New York's diverse culture. New York's architecture is a direct reflection of its immigrant culture, a melting pot of people and ideas from all corners of the globe. As one of the most culturally diverse cities in the world, New York's buildings incorporate styles, materials, and concepts from a wide array of cultures, reflecting the city's inclusive spirit. Cultural integration through design. The neighborhoods of New York are an architectural mosaic. Chinatown's traditional Chinese temples and pavilions, the Russian Orthodox churches in Brighton Beach, and the historic synagogues of the Lower East Side are just a few examples of how architecture has helped preserve and celebrate New York's diverse cultures. Buildings often serve as symbols of identity and community, offering physical spaces where cultures can thrive. Architectural diversity in the boroughs. The integration of different architectural styles throughout New York's boroughs illustrates the influence of various cultural communities. In Queens, for example, immigrants from around the world have left their mark on neighborhoods like Jackson Heights and Flushing, where Art Deco, mid-century modern, and international-style buildings blend with more traditional homes and businesses from various parts of the world. Public institutions and identity. New York's cultural institutions, such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Apollo Theater, and the Brooklyn Academy of Music, serve as not just spaces for the arts but as architectural representations of the city's role as a cultural center. These buildings symbolize the merging of art, performance, and culture in a city where diverse communities intersect. 3. The debate over preservation versus modernization. One of the ongoing challenges New York faces is the balance between preserving its architectural heritage and embracing modern development. This tension between historic preservation and modernization is a central theme in the city's architectural narrative. Historic preservation movement. As the city's architectural legacy grew, there were increasing efforts to protect its historic landmarks and districts. The creation of the Landmarks Preservation Commission, LPC, in 1965 was a pivotal moment in New York's architectural history. Landmark designations have helped preserve iconic buildings, such as the Flatiron Building, Grand Central Station, and the Brooklyn Bridge, ensuring that New York's architectural history remains visible amid new development. Conflicts and controversies. The preservation movement, however, is not without its critics. Many argue that strict preservation laws can hinder development and progress, leading to debates over whether certain buildings or neighborhoods should be protected. The gentrification of historically significant neighborhoods, such as Soho and Greenwich Village, has brought about discussions on how to preserve the cultural identity of an area while fostering economic growth and affordable housing. The role of modern architecture. On the other side of the debate is the demand for new, innovative designs that represent the future. Modern architecture, with its sleek glass facades, sustainable design, and cutting-edge technologies, often clashes with the classical and ornate buildings that have long defined New York's skyline. While some argue that such developments represent progress, others contend that they compromise the city's character. The construction of high-rise condos in neighborhoods like Tribeca and Chelsea has sparked debates about how to integrate modern architecture without erasing the historic charm of New York. Adaptive reuse. In an effort to bridge the gap, adaptive reuse has emerged as a popular solution. By repurposing old industrial buildings and warehouses into modern office spaces, lofts, or mixed-use developments, architects have found ways to preserve the city's architectural fabric while also accommodating modern needs. Examples include the High Line, an old elevated railway-turned park, and the conversion of loft buildings in Dumbo into residential and commercial spaces. 4. The global impact of New York's skyline. New York's skyline has become one of the most recognizable architectural landmarks in the world, symbolizing both the city's grandeur and its influence on global architecture. The city's bold architectural designs have set trends and influenced building styles worldwide. The rise of the skyscraper. New York is synonymous with the skyscraper. Early innovations in steel frame construction and elevators paved the way for the development of towering buildings like the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building, which became icons of both New York and American ambition. These structures were groundbreaking at the time and set a standard for cities across the world to emulate. Influence on global cities. New York's innovative architecture has inspired cities like Chicago, Dubai, and Shanghai. The skyscraper, as an architectural form, has been adopted in many parts of the world, with Dubai's Burj Khalifa and Shanghai's Jinmao Tower drawing inspiration from New York's iconic buildings. Architectural diplomacy. The development of the United Nations headquarters on the East River further cemented New York's position as a global hub of diplomacy and international relations. The building, designed by an international team of architects, symbolizes the city's role as a crossroads for global interaction, much like its diverse architectural styles reflect the convergence of cultures. Modern global impact. Today, New York continues to influence architectural trends with new projects such as One World Trade Center, The Edge at Hudson Yards, and The Vessel. These modern structures continue to shape the skyline while offering new technological and environmental solutions. The global impact of New York's architecture lies in its ability to push boundaries and redefine what is possible in the built environment. Architecture plays a profound role in shaping New York's identity, serving as both a mirror to its past and a guide to its future. As the city continues to evolve, its architecture will undoubtedly continue to reflect the dynamic forces of social change, cultural diversity, and the tension between preservation and progress. New York's skyline is not just a collection of buildings, it is an ever-evolving symbol of the city's global impact, creativity, and resilience, cementing its place as a leading architectural capital of the world. Conclusion. New York City's architectural journey is one of constant evolution, shaped by its diverse culture, history, and the ever-changing demands of modern life. From its colonial beginnings to its status as a global capital, New York's built environment has always been a reflection of the city's aspirations, challenges, and resilience. The buildings that populate its neighborhoods and define its skyline are not merely structures but are symbols of the city's social and political transformations, its cultural diversity, and its vision for the future. New York's ongoing architectural evolution. New York City is a place where history and innovation coexist in a constantly evolving landscape. Its architecture has never been static. Each period, each wave of immigrants, and each cultural shift has left an indelible mark on the city's physical fabric. From the early Dutch colonial buildings that laid the groundwork for Manhattan's streets to the skyscrapers of the 20th century, and the modern designs of today, New York's architectural evolution mirrors the broader changes the city has undergone. As one of the world's leading cultural, financial, and technological hubs, New York continues to attract innovative architects and designers pushing the boundaries of what's possible. The city's ever-changing skyline, the ongoing renovation of neighborhoods like Hudson Yards, and the adaptive reuse of historic buildings like the High Line all reflect the drive for new ideas while maintaining a respect for tradition. Historic preservation remains a key theme in the city's ongoing evolution. As old buildings are preserved or repurposed, the architectural dialogue between the past and present continues. New York has learned to incorporate elements of its rich history into modern designs, finding ways to celebrate both heritage and progress. Landmarks such as the Empire State Building, Statue of Liberty, and Grand Central Terminal still stand as testimony to a bygone era, while new icons like One World Trade Center and The Vessel signal a new chapter in the city's architectural narrative. The increasing focus on sustainability and environmentally responsible design is also shaping the future of New York's architecture. Green building technologies, urban parks, and eco-friendly materials are now part of the city's urban landscape, reflecting a global shift toward sustainability. The rise of green rooftops, solar energy systems, and the use of recycled materials in construction demonstrate that New York is embracing a more environmentally conscious future. The future of the city's urban landscape. Looking ahead, the future of New York's architectural landscape is both exciting and uncertain. The city will continue to balance the needs of its ever-growing population with its commitment to preserving its cultural and architectural heritage. As the city's neighborhoods evolve and new developments emerge, several key trends and challenges will shape the future of New York's architecture. Technological innovation and smart cities. The integration of technology into the urban environment will continue to reshape the city's buildings and infrastructure. Smart cities are no longer a distant dream. New York is already experimenting with smart grids, data-driven building management systems, and interactive public spaces that cater to the needs of its digital age residents. Buildings will become more responsive to their environments, with automated systems managing everything from heating and cooling to security and lighting. Affordable housing and urban density. One of New York's most pressing challenges is addressing the ongoing housing crisis. As the city continues to grow, affordable housing will remain a central issue. New architectural solutions will need to balance high-density living with comfort and quality of life. The development of micro-apartments, modular housing, and mixed-use spaces will likely become more prevalent as architects seek creative ways to accommodate a growing population while maintaining livability. Resiliency in the face of climate change. As a coastal city, New York faces significant challenges related to climate change and rising sea levels. The future of the city's architecture will need to prioritize resilient design, with buildings and infrastructure built to withstand flooding, storms, and other natural disasters. The resilient waterfront initiatives, such as the East River Esplanade and the Hudson River Park, are examples of the city's commitment to preparing for future challenges, while also enhancing its urban environment. Cultural and community integration. New York's commitment to diversity and inclusivity will continue to influence the city's architectural identity. The design of new spaces will need to consider not only aesthetic and functional concerns but also how they can foster community engagement, inclusivity, and cultural expression. The evolution of neighborhoods like Harlem, Chinatown, and Little Italy, which have always been dynamic reflections of the city's cultural mosaic, will continue to inspire new architectural developments that embrace the city's rich heritage. Public spaces and green architecture. As the city densifies, there will be an increasing emphasis on public spaces and green infrastructure. New parks, green roofs, and pedestrian-friendly streets will be designed to improve residents' quality of life and promote environmental sustainability. The High Line serves as a model of how old infrastructure can be creatively adapted into green spaces, and future projects will likely follow suit, further enhancing the city's commitment to nature and urban life. Final thoughts. New York City's architecture is not just a reflection of its past, it is a powerful expression of its ever-changing identity. As the city evolves, its buildings will continue to tell the story of the people who live, work, and create in this dynamic urban center. The architectural evolution of New York will be shaped by the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century, and the city will undoubtedly continue to inspire architects, designers, and residents around the world. The future of New York's urban landscape is one of growth, sustainability, inclusivity, and technological advancement, all while staying rooted in the city's rich architectural legacy. As the city moves forward, it will continue to stand as a beacon of innovation and a symbol of the limitless possibilities that architecture can offer in shaping a better, more vibrant world. Thank you for watching this video from Triune Biblical University Global Extension. We appreciate your time and attention as you engage with our content. Should you have any questions or inquiries, feel free to reach out to us at any time. Our team is here to assist you, and we look forward to connecting with you. Stay blessed, and thank you once again for being part of this journey with us.